Today we are celebrating the incredible and diverse research of our undergraduates and honoring those who have excelled in their disciplines. While individual ingenuity and drive are to be commended, it is also important to recognize those who have supported us to this point. North Central is built first and foremost on the dedication of faculty and staff who push us to grow both professionally and personally, not only educators but mentors. A college like ours needs a leader who understands the importance of that relationship, and we have been lucky to find such a person in Dr. Troy Hammond. A graduate of Milligan College, President Hammond knows firsthand how a liberal arts education can propel students forward, making them competitive in and beyond the academic arena. As a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow, he recognizes the need to encourage undergraduate research, even making an impromptu visit to this year's National Conference for Undergraduate Research, where a record 59 North Central students presented their work. After receiving his PhD from MIT, President Hammond went on to work with various organizations, most recently in renewable energy technologies at Blue Star Energy. His devotion to undergraduates, sustainability, and research ensure that today's Rawl Symposium and Honors Convocation will endure even after he leaves. This makes him a perfect fit for North Central as it continues to inspire undergraduates to be involved and productive leaders. Please join me in thanking and welcoming Dr. Troy Hammond.
Thank you, Megan, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone, to the 18th Annual Rawl Symposium for Undergraduate Research. This celebration of scholarship is a highlight of the college's academic year. Events like this are vitally important to students from all disciplines as they advance their skills in critical inquiry, problem solving, and communication. And this forum shines a spotlight on important scholarship that is happening all across campus in the collaborative research of students and faculty. We owe a debt of gratitude to the late Dr. Joseph Edward Rawl, class of 1940, for his vision and encouragement to create this event in 1998. And this day continues to serve as an important legacy to the Rawl family and to North Central's ongoing commitment to undergraduate research. Dr. Rawl understood the importance of an academic forum as the ideal way to celebrate and share student scholarship. He actively participated in the symposium over the years, often bringing his colleagues from the National Institutes of Health and setting the precedent for inviting renowned scholars to give the keynote address. Another ardent supporter of this event is our Vice President of Academic Affairs and Dean of Faculty, Dr. Devadas Pandian, who has advocated for undergraduate research across all divisions, faculty mentoring, and a culture of inquiry that prepares our graduates for advanced degrees. As he prepares to retire at the end of June, we owe him a debt of gratitude for the role he's played in the ongoing success of this symposium. Today's keynote speaker well understands how faculty teaching and mentoring inspires great research and academic success. Dr. Dave Pritchard is the Cecil and Ida Green Professor of Physics at MIT and is a renowned leader in the field of atomic physics. In both 1997 and 2001, the Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded for research in the field of atom optics, a field in which Professor Pritchard is a founding father. In both cases, laureates were significant mentees of Professor Pritchard, either as students or postdocs. And in both cases, his fingerprints were all over the research accomplishments that earned the prize. Among his many accomplishments and awards, which you can read in your Honors Day program, he is a recipient of the Broida Prize of the American Physical Society, which is very much like a Most Valuable Player Award for atomic physics, as well as prestigious teaching and mentoring awards from MIT. For the past 10 to 15 years, Professor Pritchard's focus has shifted to development of online physics tutoring technology and research into how students learn most effectively, a topic we will hear about today. It is particularly special to have Professor Pritchard, I know him as Dave, here today because he was my mentor and thesis advisor for my PhD research at MIT. For those that don't know, experimental atomic physics is very much a team-based endeavor, with 3 to 6 students working on any one experiment in a laboratory that's a fairly typical-sized academic laboratory. Dave assembled and led amazingly diverse and talented teams and provided the resources and mentorship needed for them to succeed, both individually and as a group. There were a great many things that I internalized from his leadership style that prepared me for later success, both inside and outside of academia, and for that, I will always be deeply grateful. After Dave's talk today, there should be time for questions, so be prepared. And it's with great honor that I present Professor David Pritchard. Dave.
Thank you, George. All right. So I'm delighted to be here, and I want to say that I owe it all to people like Troy, except now I've been doing education research for a while, so I owe it to the people in this picture here. And you know, I count not only my 3 Nobel Prize mentees as successes, but also Troy, someone who has risen to a position of a college president without any gray hair at all yet. I'm sure you'll take care of that. Oh, I think we're supposed to switch to the other microphone, so I'll turn it on here. So, you know, I sometimes wondered, I know all you need to do to get a Nobel Prize is to get a brilliant idea and do it, right? You can just do that at a young age. And in fact, one of my mentees is even younger than Troy. But to get all the way to be the president of university, you know, you really have to have your eye on the ball. And I must say that I remember Troy's first day in the lab. He showed up already dressed for graduation. And I don't mean to imply that he spent all his time in the lab, because he didn't. And as you can see, his dress has changed, but his companion has not. And it frustrates me that they don't look any different today. Okay, so I'd like to get on to the more serious thing and talk about causes and issues and revolution in education. You know, the title of my talk is you know, what about the future of learning? And you know, people are always saying, oh, you know, technology is going to change everything. I mean, the printing press, the blackboard, radio, television, all these things were going to revolutionize education. And actually they didn't. If I have time at the end, I'll show you a 14th century classroom and compare it to a 21st century classroom, and there is surprisingly little difference. But I won't start there. I want you all to think for just a moment, what is really new these days that is causing, or should cause, or will cause, in my opinion, a revolution in education? Okay, what's really the root cause here? What's new? And so on smaller audiences might be a little bit of participation. We're not going to do that. I will ask you some questions, though. So the first thing is that the internet commoditizes information. You don't have to know. When I was a kid, you know, I knew Alabama, Montgomery, Alaska, Juneau. I could go down the list of states and state capitals. I mean, all I do now is I just type Alabama state capital return, or I just ask Siri, and I find out that Montgomery is the city of 80,000 on the Oskaloosa River, and so on and so forth, right? More than I could possibly remember. So what should you learn in school today? So that's one problem. But the more significant problem, especially if you're a social constructivist view of education and you think that, for instance, free schooling was driven by the need to turn farm boys into factory workers. Now we have to go from factory workers to knowledge workers. Because we have, as everyone says, the knowledge economy, which kind of means that people who don't have knowledge are screwed. But anyway, so what are the new issues? Well, I'm going to address three right away in the early part of the talk. First thing is I'll give you a cognitive perspective. Second thing is I'll discuss a little our research on what students should learn. And the third thing is I'll describe some other community responses to this situation. So let me start off. Oh yeah, and every time you see something at the top here, let's see, where's my pointer there? Okay, like, that's not working, heck. It's supposed to mimic, oh well, where you see that, the red title, it means I'm starting a new topic, and hopefully you can wake up and pay attention a little bit. Okay, so here's the deal. And I can categorize knowledge into 7 or 8 categories as Bloom did, but I'm just going to use 4, which are pretty standard, at least the first 3. So just say you're learning freshman physics, which I imagine a number of you took once upon a time. So there's facts and concepts. So F equals ma is a fact. It's part of a model actually, but it's a vector equation. Okay. Now to actually use it, you have to draw the body, you have to draw the force diagram, you write down the equations, and then you solve it. That's a procedure or an operation. The next stage up is strategic. You look at a problem and decide that although you know about angular momentum and energy, that because of the details of this problem, the specific case, you have to use F equals ma to solve it. I've looked in vain. I have a whole bookshelf of introductory mechanics books, which of course are sent to me free because I'm a teacher. And not one of them, almost all of them, start off with mechanics. They talk about Newton's laws, energy, momentum, angular momentum, rigid body motion. And then chapter 13, they switch to waves. The chapter 13 ought to be how to look at a new problem and figure out which of these previous 12 chapters has the stuff in it that you need to solve that problem. But that's strategic knowledge. And you don't see that. Now, of course, people don't even hire you that much for having strategic knowledge, unless, of course, you start off working for a consulting firm, as Troy did. But people hire you to have adaptive expertise, to create new ideas, to create new things. Okay, so now let's look at some common everyday occurrences. Textbooks, lectures, peer instruction, they're in the facts mostly. Problem sets, examinations, you have to do procedures. Now, when you get a real problem, as opposed to an exercise, but a real problem, then you have to think how to do it. If it doesn't say which chapter to use, then you have to figure out which chapter to use. And most high-stakes tests are over here in the left 2 categories. Most publisher products are in the left 2 categories. And now I want to introduce a different perspective here. Let's look at it from the instructor perspective. And let's say that all these things in black, the professor knows the answer when the problem is posed, and the professor knows the intended method by which he or she wants you to solve this problem. Let's move up the cognitive scale a little bit to the blue, to where the answer is known, but there are many solutions. So I might put in very challenging exams. When you see a problem that's a real problem that you've not seen anything like that before, when you actually get to be more expert and you get your answer and you think, now how can I check that answer? Does it make any sense? I mean, I could check the dimensions, I could check some limiting cases, I could notice that if I change M1, the 2 masses, M1 and M2, the answer ought to reverse sign, so it's got some symmetry. You know, there's lots of ways I can check it. The point is there isn't any one way that you're supposed to check it. Okay, so it's in this category. And if you're trying to estimate something, it doesn't matter what it is. How many piano tuners are there in Chicago was a standard question, but what's the total revenue from that's gotten these days from satellites, from the services that you sell that are based in a satellite? I mean, these are kinds of questions you have to be able to ask and to answer. Okay, then finally over here, there's adaptive expertise, basic research, designing things, a good PhD thesis. Okay, so that's the cognitive perspective. Now, what is the society, how's our society responding? Well, of course, you probably know all the controversy about Common Core state standards. Maps and parts. This is an on-campus pedagogy we have that I'm not even going to talk about. One of my favorite organizations, and there are several, Achieve, Common Core, National Academy reports on what people should learn, is the 21st Century Student Outcomes. It's the Partnership for 21st Century Student Outcomes. So basically, they've simplified it all down. As you know, when I was a kid, you went to school and you had to learn the 3 R's. So that was writing, reading, and arithmetic. And obviously, they didn't include spelling in that. But now, these guys at P21 have introduced the idea of the 4 C's: creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. And I'll have more to say about some of those a little bit. But the main thing that I think we have to take home is that we need to be able to assess these things, or it's all hype. I mean, my course teaches creativity better than your course. Well, what's the evidence? Our college prepares you to be a lifelong learner better than the next college that we compete with. How do you tell that? I mean, we've got to be able to assess some of these higher order skills. And that's a real challenge, and there's some progress, and by and large, I won't talk about that. But please keep that in mind when somebody starts blathering on about the 4 C's. But, and so now I have my first question for you. Glad to see most of you still awake. How many people know what DBER is? I didn't bring my binoculars, but I don't see any. Okay. So, it's discipline-based education research. And so this is, for example, about a 3-year-old report from the National Research Council on the field of education research, on a particular field of discipline-based education researchers. People have been philosophizing and teaching, how to teach. I mean, how to maintain discipline, how to have a good lesson plan, how to fairly evaluate students. But discipline-based education research is, we'd like to teach you Newtonian mechanics, and we ought to acknowledge the fact that until Galileo and Newton, people designed pyramids and built the aqueducts in Rome, and they didn't understand motion at all. They didn't understand it right. And that's because it's very intuitive to think about motion, for example, as being motion. That is something moving. And Newton's first law says, no, that's not right. What you want to think about is a state of motion, and the natural state of motion, elaborating on all the previous theories, that Aristotle and the impetus theory had models of natural motion. And Newton said natural motion is that you have an object at rest and it remains at rest, or an object moving and it remains moving. That's the way to think about motion. And then the other kind of motion is accelerated motion, where it doesn't do that. Now, you're not programmed that way, because if you see a tiger over there, it's very important whether the tiger is stationary or coming towards you. If he's coming towards you, it doesn't matter much whether he's accelerating or not. You'd better get out of the way. Okay, so we have to address misconceptions, and often we don't do that. And it wasn't until discipline-based education research came along and pointed out that students didn't understand conceptual knowledge very well, that this even became popular. So often to show trends, you know, I'm an experimental physicist, and I sort of go on data. So I try to get data any way I can. So this is a curve here of the number of times in books up to 2008 this is a service available from Google. It's called Ngrams. The words education research appeared in books. And it went from 14 occurrences to 214. That's by 2008. I'm sure it's a lot higher now. And I've listed some of the milestones along the road when Mickey Chi, one of my heroines, pointed out in 1981 that students are not little experts, just waiting for you to pull the facts into an expert framework that already exists. Students are novices, and they classify problems differently, they approach problems differently, they never bother to check their answer. There's 5 or 10 significant differences between students, between novices and experts, and we teach students as if they were little experts, which they're not. And then there was the forced concept inventory about conceptual knowledge, peer instruction invented, well, not invented, but popularized by Eric Mazur, which is a way to deal with conceptual knowledge. And recently, a survey about students' learning attitudes towards science. And like the previous ones that it's based on, it showed that, that introductory physics courses, in general, reduce the expertise of students' attitudes towards learning. They reduce it by about 10%. Great triumph for modern instruction, right? Okay. Now, I want to just say, in this report that I showed you in Susan Singer's report, they sort of summarize, as their executive summary, where discipline-based education research is now. And they say discipline-based education research clearly shows that research-based instructional strategies are more effective than traditional lecture, both in improving conceptual knowledge and attitudes about learning. Okay. Well, that's a powerful statement for a big committee to make about a subject as intrinsically controversial as education is. But you might notice there's nothing in that executive summary, if you read it all, about the 4 C's, because there's no assessment. And so, being a scientific committee, they couldn't say very much. Okay, so now I want to go on to what to teach. And this is a survey that I did because after I'd been teaching for 40 years and beginning to realize maybe that I hadn't been teaching so well, but I'll present some evidence for that in a moment, I decided to ask a lot of different teachers the following question. Let's imagine that due to a change in the academic calendar, you have 20% more time to teach the introductory physics course to non-physics majors, and the syllabus has not been expanded. You know, we are slaves to that catalog description that says all the topics we can get through. If we go through the topics at light speed, that's one of the reasons that students get less expert. And so what learning would you seek to add or emphasize with this extra time? And we published a paper about that. And we actually had a novel idea, which was that we would not only ask professors this question, but we would also ask students a similar question. What would you like to learn besides all the stuff that we're cramming into your head? And so I talked to a lot of professors, and we boiled it down to 4 big areas: course content, scientific ideas, problem solving, and the relation of physics and to the world, or physics and you to the world. I'll elaborate on these individual, the content of each one of these as we go on. So here's the 700 instructor votes, what to teach. And I think what's notable is the red line down the middle is par, so most stuff is par, right? but wider content. The teachers trashed this. They didn't want to teach more content. We all know we teach too much content. We, as one wise teacher said to me once, Vicky Weisskopf, a famous founder of quantum mechanics, he said, he was the department head, he'd call us assistant professors in there, and he said, when you're a teacher, you have a choice. You can cover a lot, or you can uncover a little. And we're too far on the covering a lot side, and we all know that. But the system makes us do it. We're not interested, as you can see, in teaching the relation of physics to everyday life. We want to teach you the grand principles and the abstract principles and have you work down from there, even if that's not how people learn. And finally, we think the most important thing is to make sense of the answer. Try to figure out if the answer is right, if it's reasonable, does it fit in with everything else? Do you know? Put it in with your accomplished knowledge. And so then I managed to get several friends of mine to ask students the same question, or the slightly rephrased question. And so here you see the students' responses, and what's important is to see them together, and then I'm going to block out that region in the middle where everyone is close to par and the error bars overlap. But so now, remember I said that the teachers thought they had too much content, wanted to teach less content. On the top there, where are the students? Their number one preference is for more content. Then the students hate labs, and we think they're okay. And our priority as teachers is making sense of the answer. Well, that's a second most trashed thing for the students. They didn't want to make sense of the answer. How the hell do you think they got into a selective college? It wasn't by being on the high-stakes test and getting this thing and saying, I don't know about that. Maybe I should do this little calculation on the side to see if I just got the right answer. While the clock is ticking, is that a wise strategy? Absolutely not. And finally, the students really want to know how this stuff relates to everyday life. And we want to teach, we don't want to touch that. Okay. So, in the paper, it's expressed as a correlation coefficient. The correlation between what the students want to learn and what we want to teach is minus 0.4. Now, what that means geometrically is the students want to go in this direction, and we're not just going orthogonal to them, we're going like 120 degrees. And then we worry that they don't seem interested and engaged. Okay. So I thought about this. This is a pretty big discrepancy, and as far as I know, it hadn't really been addressed before. So I thought about this for a while, and I decided it was really professors versus students. And in a sort of a religious argument, except that instead of quoting from the Bible, I'm going to quote from the course catalog. And it says, college will turn you into lifelong problem solvers and learners, okay? And so, welcome to college, where we're going to turn you into expert professionals and learners. And we're going to start today in my intro physics course. On the other hand, the students are saying, well, the college catalog says that freshman year is for exploration, and you don't have to pick a major until after the end of that year. So I'm looking for a major. Can you show me why physics is important and why I should invest 10 years in my life in this subject? And that's the 120 degrees right there. Okay. I'll give you some more advice, so I'll get on there. So So how do we bring these things together? Because Troy said, well, you're giving a talk, and I said, who's the audience? And he said, well, it's got students in it, and it's going to have most of our faculty, too. So now, how do I talk? Out of both sides of my mouth would be about right, 120 degrees. But the students, you want to look at this and select what's most educational, and the professors, you want to explain to the students what's good before you hit them over the head with it. Okay, so I want to go back over this thing here and just look at where the students, since the majority of the audience is students, I want to say just where I think, based on speaking ex cathedra of having done educational research for 12 years, I think the students are right in some places. You're right. The labs as currently constructed That's to say, cookbook labs, not discovery labs. They don't really teach much. As one of my colleagues said, if you have to read a 10-page lab procedures write-up before you come to lab, how are you ever going to see that the lab is a clear confrontation of experiment with theory? You can't. It's 10 pages of gobbledygook between what happened when the ball rolled down the plane and your concept of energy. And the second thing is, yes, the students are right. You can't just learn abstract knowledge. You have to learn how to integrate it, constructive theories of education, how to construct it, integrate it into everything else you know, so that you, in the end of the day, you wind up being a wiser person. Of course, the teachers aren't wrong about everything. For instance, the teachers, you might say, look, don't just learn facts. They're all on the internet. You can learn about, the students want to learn about gyroscopes, relativity, quantum mechanics, and we're teaching them, 17th century old physics, right? But just learning about relativity, to really understand relativity, really understand quantum mechanics, it's a much more than just a one semester. You might begin to do it if you take the course for a semester and then are a TA in the course for the next semester. Then when you have to teach something, you really learn it. And another thing is, look, I think if I want to say one thing to you guys as a teacher, I would say communication skills and scientific argument and sense making. Get it right and convince the world that you've gotten it right. And so I want to contrast the problems that you're measured by, these 20-minute, half-hour problems that you can get done in that amount of time if you do them right because they're on the test, with a more real-life problem. The real-life problem is either you're supervising someone who is designing the bridge that your firm is bidding on building, or maybe the engineer who has spent the whole week with her computer program figuring out how big the bridge cable should be. And so let's just imagine you're the supervisor. And so this engineer comes in and she says, okay, so I figured out that the bridge cables ought to be 22 inches in diameter. And so, well, why do you think that, Sue? Well, because my computer program says that. I mean, are you going to stake the reputation of yourself and your firm on that everything was right in the program and that she used it absolutely correctly? I mean, you're a damn fool if you do, right? So you have to have some conversation. It has to go maybe something like this. The bridge we're building here is a lot like the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge, but it had 30-inch cables. And how come you think this bridge can work? It's got the same number of lanes, roughly the same aspect ratio, with 22-inch cables. I'm worried it's going to fall out. And then Sue had better talk about answer analysis. She'd better say something like, well, we're using a much lighter aggregate in the roadbed. Most of the weight of the bridge is in the roadbed, and so there's a factor of 40% less load due to the fact that we have a lighter aggregate in the thing. And the second thing is, that the Verrazano-Narrows Bridge was built in 1965, and we're using steel now that's 40%, 50% stronger. Now you put those two things together, and it's a factor of 2 less steel we're going to need, and so that's the square root of 2 times 30, and that would be 19 inches. So divided by the square root of 2. And so the 21 inches or 22 inches that I said, I think, really even allows a good safety margin. And that's the kind of discussion you have to have before you will sign off on this. Okay. So let me just say, I want to see where I am here, 20 minutes. Okay. So I've given you the engram for education research. Now I want to talk a little bit about where education, on-campus education is going. And I've plotted here in blue the previous education research thing, and I plotted in red the n-grams for blended learning. So blended learning has, is really coming up. Even by 2008, it's probably equal, well, I don't know now, but it's certainly continued to grow, this idea of blended learning. And in fact, I would summarize the changes that I see coming as the lecture is getting replaced by peer instruction, and then to blended, then to flipped. So what these things all mean is that by the peer instruction is usually called clickers. I don't just drone on for an hour, I drone on for 10 or 12 minutes, and then I ask you some question, and I look at the responses, and given that the question is about right, which means about half people get it right, half people get it wrong, I say, why don't you turn to your seatmate and discuss this question? And the classroom that has been so quiet, suddenly, after about 30 seconds, it gets really noisy, and then about 2 minutes later, it begins to tail off. And so then I say, okay, so now let's see how whether you've changed your mind at all. Why don't you vote again? And usually you see a tremendous swing towards people getting the right answer, just by talking to themselves, not by getting any input from the professor. That's peer instruction. Then, of course, you can use a pre-class online assignment. And I personally recommend masteringphysics.com, which is something that my son and I created and is the most successful tutor in STEM. How many people here know about mastering physics or mastering chemistry or mastering engineering? Okay. It should be higher because penetration is over 50% in the relevant market for that product. It's the most penetrating product that Pearson makes. And probably the most influential thing that I have done career-wise, because it's used by 2.5 million people every year. And actually working through the problems, and 350,000 are in physics, and they're actually doing the problems that I put in there with the hints and the wrong answer, the responses to the frequently given wrong answers and everything. But the idea of this is that instead of the students coming to class blank, and some with a fair amount of knowledge and some without too much, you've all had to do the same assignment, do the same reading, answer the same questions on it. And so maybe, at least when I say acceleration, you'll know what I mean. And now we can use blended to achieve what's called the flipped classroom. Now, what people usually mean by the flipped classroom is take the dull, boring lecture and put in a videotape, and then have the students watch that outside of class and ask and answer some questions, and then have an interesting interaction in class where you have more one-on-one with the students. That's the idea of the flipped classroom, and I've been. How many people? Oh, another little question here. How many people know what a MOOC is? Okay, so this is a massive open online course, and there are 1,000 of them. Well, I'll get to that later. But the MOOCs have panicked a lot of college administrators, and so and the boards of directors have actually fired one college president who was subsequently reinstated. So this could be a big issue, and so the issue is, how are you using online learning, and but fundamentally, I think maybe the MOOCs, and I've been trying to study learning in them, and I don't think that they're so valuable for that, but they make us ask an important question, and that is, what on earth are the students getting for spending $50,000 a year to come here when they can see better lectures on YouTube or in one of these MOOCs? And so that's a sort of question for the administration and the faculty. Okay, so now I'm just going to tell you a little bit of data analysis in learning or not learning. Remember, I'm an experimental physicist, and I like data. So I want you to think here. What is the best predictor of the final exam score? So, you know, often you're in the middle of a term and you'd like to know which students really are going to need some help. And so you have a lot of data and you try to figure out from all these various data, there's a diagnostic test, the first midterm exam, written homework, mastering physics, attendance and participation in recitation. Okay, all these are variables you have data on. So you can just ask, what is the best predictor of the final exam score among all these things? Or is it something else? Okay, so how many people, well, I'm far enough behind that I'm just going to skip over this. Have in your mind what you think is the answer. And the answer is, here's the final exam score. And you can see these different things. The diagnostic test, S, is the mastered physics, X1 is the first midterm. The rest of the stuff didn't matter. But the coefficient is biggest in front of C. The coefficient is twice as big, roughly speaking, and that means that it has 4 times as much effect. It explains 4 times the variance on the final. What do you suppose C is? Copying your online homework. Okay, so I'm going to tell you some of the good news and some of the bad news. I mean, when you invest 5-6 years in a product like Mastering Physics, which I did with my son, he did the program, and I did the content, and I had a lot more help from my colleagues with the content and undergraduates than he did with the programming. Anyway, so pretty encouraging stuff I was teaching a course in the spring for people who had not done well in the mechanics course in the fall. And so we could just define learning as the difference between your score on the final in May minus your score in the final in December. Sensible thing. That's the effect of this course on your mechanics knowledge. And so you see the Mastering Physics, wow, that was really big. And then we did some research and we found a lot of students who were answering the question completely correctly within 2 minutes. Whereas most students took 10 minutes and 90% of them would make some little mistake at least on one of the 3 parts and get some feedback and have to submit it again. So of course at first we thought, geez, MIT has got a lot of geniuses. And when we sent them an email and asked them what they, how they did it so fast, they sent out 40 emails. And we didn't get any responses. And then we sort of realized, oh yeah, it's because they're copying the homework. So here we could now measure, this is 2 standard deviation learning effect, that's just great. All right. So we could divide the students into what fraction of the homework problems that you submitted this past term did you copy? And if it's less than 10%, your grades go like the green grades. This is a T-score here, so 0.5 is average, 0.4 is 1 standard deviation below. And then the more you copy, the worse you do. And since the students here in the red curve still did about 60%, we would find that overall copying implies about a 2 standard deviation change in your final grade. When you started off equal within error to everybody else. So this is a pretty fantastic amount of learning, because if you read Bloom about the effect of a personal tutor, he says it's worth 2 standard deviations. So here, 1 element of the course is worth over 2 grades difference. So of course, I don't recommend copying your homework. And if you want to read all about it, you can read that paper. And if you can pronounce the first name, I'll give you a copy free. Okay. Then we started looking more carefully at the final exam. And the final exam has conceptual questions on it, and it has calculational questions or conventional problems, symbolic answer questions. And what we did was we plotted how the students did as a function of the amount of homework that they copied. And we could only measure the symbolic homework copying because on multiple choice people guess. There's all kinds of strategies that mess up the timing. And so what we found was that copying Mastering Physics really had this 2.4 standard deviations of benefit or of loss, or doing it had that much benefit on the problems on the final exam that involved symbolic answers. But on the problems that involved conceptual knowledge, it didn't make a damn bit of difference. In spite of all the great Socratic tutoring, the responses to your wrong answers, the thoughtful responses to your wrong answers, and then the list of hints, what steps to take to work through this thing, it didn't help the students' conceptual knowledge at all to do this program. What it helped was that their ability to solve problems where you had to answer symbolically. So for those of you who don't know, okay, fine, that's what I just said. So I want to tell you about the difference between conceptual and conventional problems. So here you see two circuits. One on the left has got 3 light bulbs and a battery. The one on the right is a little bit more complicated because it's got 2 batteries, but it has 3 resistors, which are just like 3 light bulbs, right? Okay. Now, the conventional problem says, okay, there's the circuit, calculate the current going through the resistor in the middle there, and calculate the voltage drop between points P and points Q. Well, look at that, that's a pretty complicated problem, and you have to know to use Kirchhoff's laws, and you write down the circuit equations and you solve the answer. Question on the left just says if I close the switch, which of the bulbs gets brighter and which of them gets dimmer? I mean, I would think, you can almost answer that question pretty much just by looking at it. If you close the switch, well, you've shorted out C, so it's going to get dimmer, and you put the same voltage across just A and B, so they're going to get brighter. That's obvious to me, and to most experts. Well, so the students, the problem right is like an exam problem. Students will average maybe 75%. And the students said, they look at those concept tests and they said, my kids are going to knock this out of the park. That stuff is so much simpler. They're going to get 80, 90%. And what was actually found was that they would get about 60%. Just 60% of those simple concept questions they would get right. And then somebody started giving the test for the kids walked in the door, and it turned out they would get 46% when they walked in the door. That these introductory lecture-based courses taught the students only 23% of the simple concepts that they didn't know when they walked in the door did they learn in the course by the time they took the exit test. So this is a pretty stunning rebuke, and it gets us back to the question of how do we explain this disparity between the symbolic responses and the conceptual problem responses. And so, I mean, as you can imagine, when I found out that mastering physics was 2 standard deviations of learning, I was really pumped. I mean, this is incredible. For $45, they're learning more than in the class and all the stuff that they're paying $45,000 for. That's an accomplishment, right? That's disruptive technology. Read all about it in Christensen's books. Okay, but how do you explain this? This is rather a downer. And I basically have the expert reaction. These problems cover the same material. If you can solve the problem on the right there, you can answer the question on the left by doing a loop with the switch open and a loop with the switch closed and calculating the current through the bulbs, and lo and behold, you'll get the right answer. So how do we explain the disparity? And I'm afraid that what it means is we're only teaching students to answer our examinations, to answer the questions we put on the exam. And that's why the students are always right before the exam clamoring for, do you have a practice test? Okay? And I would just say that and I'm talking not to the teacher here, you must learn to learn, not just to get a good grade. At some point, you're going to be responsible for those bridge cables, and you had better have learned the stuff necessary to design those cables and figure out whether you got the answer right yourself. And I will get off my podium now, and I will ask you my next question. Okay, so these are data, and the data here are the number of accesses to an online textbook that was the core textbook course versus the day of the semester. So you have August, and you see those peaks, 3 peaks, little peak at the left. They're the weekly accesses, presumably in doing the homework. And, well, I won't tell you what the rest is, but I'm going to ask you a question, okay? How many examinations do you think there were in this course? That's right. The textbook is predominantly used as a review for the exams. And when you interview the students, they say, well, I know that a topic on the test is going to be in the assigned reading. It's not fair if it's not in the assigned reading. We've already established this, that it's not fair for the teacher to ask you to think outside the box. And so you check over all that stuff, and then you know you've read that you're ready for the test. And you'll get a good grade whether or not you learn anything. Okay, next question. Oh yeah, so the moral, I showed this to a friend of mine who spent 6 years writing really a very high quality, good electrical engineering textbook. And he looked at this thing, and his face dropped, and he said, I should have written a handbook. Why did I bother to write a textbook? Just something that they could review concisely before the test. And it would have taken only 2 years instead of 6. Anyway, so my next question is, when do students do homework? So I'll tell you, we assigned, the first year we had the online homework, we assigned it weekly, the way we did the old homework. This is the tendency, when you have this brand new technology, you use it to do the old job exactly the way you did the old job. You don't take advantage of its affordances, as they're called in education speak, of all the other things you can do with it. So the homework was due Tuesday night at 10 p.m., which turned out to be, the students were asking for much later. And one of the things we found out was that the peak hour of MIT students doing homework is midnight. And the peak is pretty well centered around there from 10 to 2. And so, but this question concerns how much of the homework do the students, you know, the goody two-shoe students have all done their homework Sunday night, right? Because they have time over the weekend. So the question is, how much homework do they have done at midnight on Sunday night, which is, they still have another 2 hours. So that's a lower bound on how much they actually have done on Sunday night. So well, I'll ask this question. How many people think that it's more than 15%? Most of you think it's just less than 15%, which is what I thought too. Wow, nobody put their hand. How about 30%? No. Okay, I'll tell you the answer. 50%. Look at this top curve. These are the kids, this is the majority of the kids who copy less than half their homework. They have it half done on Sunday night. And the kids who copy even 10 to 30%, they have it 30% done on Sunday night. It's only the high copying groups that don't have it done on Sunday night, and that's because they have to wait for their friends to finish off doing the homework so that they can copy it. Plus, they're deadline pushers anyway. You see, even at the due date, they only have it 70% done. And the way that you get full credit for all the problems that you've submitted by the due date. So they get 70, then they get a deduction for the rest for being late. Now let's see, 45 minutes, way too long. All right, I'm going to skip over this next thing. It's great, but I'm going to skip over it. Okay. So now I want to just say, what should you do? You know, in the future of education, what should you do? How can you learn better? How can you be more effective at what you want to do, or a better citizen of the world, or whatever? So the first thing to realize is that these days you don't have companies like railroads and General Motors that you go to work for and you have a lifelong relation with those companies, and they're going to provide retirements. I know I saw General Motors had, a guy had retired after 30 years, and he, 25 years he'd retired, and he had then gotten 50 years of benefits, including health insurance. I mean, and that's one of the reasons General Motors is in a lot of trouble, and that's why it's not sensible to imagine that you're going to go work for an employer and it's going to last a lifetime. So that means you're going to have to change jobs, and that means you're going to have to learn all through your lifetime. And my son summarized it well, because he was doing really well at a company, and he was making equal to my salary at that time, including his bonus. But later on, he started making more than my salary without his bonus. He's working in Silicon Valley. And he says, Dad, he says, I don't have loyalty to my employer. I have loyalty to my resume. He said, 5 years from now, I like to work in startups. 5 years from now, this company is going to be broke, or it's going to be so big and so bureaucratic that I don't want to work here. So I have to go and convince somebody to pay me 70% more than a brand new MIT graduate. Why are they going to pay me 70% more? Because I have all this experience, all this varied experience, and some of it is really relevant to what they want to do. So I have loyalty to my resume. So that's the lesson for students. What about teachers? Get a good online commercial product. Right now, they're much better than MOOCs. You could use a MOOC to prepare your students outside of class, and then do the flipped classroom. And this last one is also a problem for the administration. The contract in teaching, at a place that values education, is that, well, you may be giving 3 hours of lectures a week, but you're preparing the homework, you're preparing the tests, you're preparing the darn lectures, you're preparing the demonstrations. So you're putting in probably, if it's a decent sized course, you put in 15, 20 hours a week. So the administration's going to come to you and say, I'm going to make the deal with you. Here's the deal. Instead of putting in 15 hours a week to teach your course, you're going to only put in 12, but all those are going to be contact hours because the students didn't come here didn't pay their tuition to see you stand up in front and lecture. They paid because they want to talk to you as a person. They want to have a relationship with you. They want you to criticize them, not just show you the right way. Okay, and now for the administration. You have, the first thing I will say, and I say this to every department, I often get asked to give a talk to the physics department heads. And I say to them, look, do not get on the MOOC bandwagon of making these damn things. Use the ones that somebody else put all that effort into free. Come on, just be sensible. And the other thing is, use undergraduate teaching assistants because you're going to change your course so that the students maybe are doing problems on the board. This is how my flipped classroom works. And the staff, which is me and a couple undergraduates, we walk around and we answer the questions the students ask. Well, actually, we don't. My first lesson to them, number one, here's what you do. You walk up to a student, they're on the board, they have some answer there, and they turn to you and they say, excuse me, Professor Pritchard, or I have graduate TA, or Dr. Chen, is this right? And my instruction to the TAs is never, ever say yes. Never say yes. Say, why do you believe this? What principle is this based on? How did you check this result? That's what we're trying to get them to do, not parrot some formula. Anyway, so use undergraduate teaching assistants. Not only will this cut down the bill and balance the books, but it will also give the students a much better education because it's really a very good learning experience to have somebody ask you a question on something you're supposed to know, but you don't. Okay, next. MOOCs, okay, there's 1,000 of these things out there. Whether you want to learn about China or composite materials or light and sight or ancient heroes or advanced placement mechanics C, that's my MOOC, it's there. I think I better quit. So I won't go through this at all, but so a while back I was on a committee with some other members of the National Academy, and one thing that sort of characterizes us is we tend to be fairly blunt, and you can ask Troy what that means because that's the way I mentor people. So somebody said, why the hell did a creative atomic physicist like you, Dave, very, very successful mentor in atomic physics, why did you go to this education stuff? And so my first answer is, because, look, how many people read all your citations? I mean, I have about 20,000 citations to my scientific work, which is good. Every year, 350,000 people are doing all those problems with all the hints and the tutoring that I wrote into Mastering Physics. And another 2 million people are using it in lots of other disciplines. So that has some more impact maybe than your 20,000 citations. Think about it that way. Okay, but really, you know, the question is one in heart. And so I was on a committee to talk about changing undergraduate physics and looking at the way it is and why maybe for 40 years. I mean, I've given a talk similar to this, and it's called How 10 Years of Physics Education Research Have Disabused My Notions Formed Through 40 Years of Teaching. And basically, we could do a lot better. But I'll just read this because I think it's rather poetic, even though I was not the committee member who wrote it. In spite of the numerous challenges facing undergraduate physics education, a realistic future includes introductory physics courses that students view as an opportunity to exercise their thinking rather than their memory, to learn approaches to solving problems that transfer to other science, technology, engineering, and math courses, to improve their expertise and attitudes towards learning science, and see the relevance of physics to their future lives and to the world around them. In this future, more students, especially women and minorities underrepresented in physics, will decide to major in physics and teach others about it. So that's what I'd like to achieve. That's what I hope in your discipline you found your college education has achieved. And so I wish you all well going forward. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, I have some questions. I realize that talk's probably a little bit like the expression we have for getting an MIT education is like taking a drink from a fire hose. Does anybody have a question they'd like to ask? Yes. Well, one of the things is that I wanted to cut down the homework copying a little bit. But the other thing is I have a reluctance to give exactly the answer. And if you go through the hints, you pretty much should be able to get the answer. And so I want people to go through the hints and try to work it out rather than just giving them the answer. And if they get the answer right, it does say you're right. And one of the things we found was a number of students who got the right answer said, oh, I don't want to go on to the next problem now. I want to see the tutoring steps because that's how an expert would do it. And I want to see how the expert would do it because I know how I did it, by the way. But those are just the few students who want to learn constructively or who actually maybe want to just learn. Okay. Are there other questions? Oh, yes. Oh, no, well, the strength of the wire is that was in the second part of the response of Sue, was saying the steel we're using in the wire now is 40% stronger, has 40% higher tensile strength than the wire that was used in the Verrazano-Narrows bridge. Okay, and so therefore, that plus the fact that it has to hold up less enables us to use a lot less wire. Because otherwise, we're not going to get the contract. Yes? Okay, so in humanities, I mean, I learned to divide courses into courses where most of the homework was doing problems, which includes most of the science and engineering courses, and where most of the homework was reading something. And I think that you don't need mastering physics, but you need something that where you'll read a passage and then it will say, so what were the two things that Dr. Thorndike listed as being the primary causes of the Civil War? Because, I mean, I know when I got to college, I had a little history book, and it was the causes of the Civil War. And I read, these essays. I was reading all the essays. And I must have read 5 out of the 8 essays in the book before I started saying, geez, you know what this guy's saying is not at all what she said back there in chapter 3. I mean, it's just, this isn't history. I mean, history is just one story of what happened and who won the battle, and these guys just totally disagree. And so that was sort of the beginning of me learning to read interactively. I'd always known how to read books on how to build radios interactively. I mean, I was doing that, when I was 11 years old and I built my ham radio set. I had to read the Radio Amateur's Handbook, and at a glacially slow pace, but at least I understood what I was reading. And we have to get people to learn to read critically, and it is not a common, occurrence. And one of the things that encourages me, so a lot of students now like videos much better than they like textbooks. They like them better. That does not, there's almost zero correlation between students liking something or thinking that it's teaching them and actually that they're learning from it. But nevertheless, they prefer that, so they might spend more time on it. But there's some research by my hero and Mickey Chi, whose paper on novice experts I cited, and she showed that if students watch a live tutor a video of a live tutor talking to a tutee and answer a couple questions together, that they learn as much as the tutee. But that's scalable in terms of, you videotape it, you send it out there, it must cost 10 cents an hour to provide it to the student, whereas a personal tutor is $100 an hour. So that can be a big gain. And that's the kind of thing I think we can do in humanities. In fact, I've always, one of the big features of mastering physics was that we speak mathematics. So I can look at your wrong answer and I can classify it as one of this class of wrong answers because however it's mathematically written, this is the result. And then I can say something to you specifically about, that you should think about to realize that answer is wrong. I can't do that if I ask you what are the causes of civil war. Natural language processing is almost going to the point where it can begin to do this, but it certainly can't right now. And I always have, I don't know if you've seen Ken Burns' The Civil War, but there's this delightful Southern historian, Shelby Foote. And when he explains something from, be it states' rights or whatever it is, you understand in a really personal way how the people in the south part of the country were thinking. And to have a dialogue with him, where his responses are pre-canned, but in response to likely asked questions, I think would be tremendous. And I think that may be the future in humanities. But certainly for now, just interrupting the reading with interactive questions is. And I think Troy's standing there.
Let's thank our speaker again.
Okay.
It's my privilege to award you, Dave, with the North Central College Medal, which is an award that we established beginning at our sesquicentennial and award on occasions to distinguished alums, to RAL speakers. And the inscription for this North Central College Medal reads, Dr. David Pritchard, North Central College Medal presented at the 2015 RAL Symposium for Undergraduate Research in recognition of your contributions to the field of atomic physics, your commitment to teaching and mentoring, and an appreciation for your keynote presentation.
Okay.